There's no way you have this on yours. This is one I don't get brought up enough. My number 6 from season 7.
Okay.
Episode 13. Two Bad Neighbors.
Hi there, neighbors. I'm George Bush.
That's one of your favorites.
I love this episode.
The George
Bush episode. Holy fuck, do I love this episode.
Really?
It is so simple. It is so fun. I am smiled ear to ear the whole fucking episode. It's so good. Okay, so it starts off with Homer bored at home watching TV. And this is a great...
Before you even get into the plot, this is like a meta episode because of the feud between the Simpsons as a show, the showrunners,
right,
and the in real life,
I think it was either Barbara Bush or George Bush Sr. This is Senior, not Junior, and that made comments about like America needs to be less like the Simpsons and more like something. So
his quote was, we need to America needs to be more like the Waltons,
less like
and
the
lot less like the Simpsons.
Yeah, they weren't fans of. They thought the Simpsons was representing like a negative pop culture, like a bad influence on the youth, basically. But so they take shots at George Bush.
Yeah.
But to their credit,
that's brilliant. They should be taking shots
but here's
at
the thing.
George Bush.
But to their credit, they don't really make him out to be a complete piece of shit. Like the way they do it. Like I think they still show respect necessary for a former president.
Well,
they don't make him bump. Let me get into the plot.
Yeah.
So it starts off with Homer bored at home watching TV, and some of the, like in the golden era, man, the television was just so ripe for comedy and great like jokes and gags that would come out of the characters watching some preview or trailer or some shit. Those were some of the funniest jokes. So Homer's watching television, he's like bored, and it's like, the Grand Nationals of Sandcastle Building. Preview.
Preview.
Homer's like, what the? Homer's like, But then it's like, again, to misdirect, it's like, bikini girls, dune buggies, daredevil surfers. And then so Homer's like, like his attention's come up, and then it's like, ordinarily the beach would be full of these. Of course, they've all been cleared off to make room for the sandcastle. So like they subvert your expectation. You're like, oh, it's a boring show. Oh, maybe it's not. Oh, it is a boring show.
Oh, it is a boring.
It's brilliant.
That's brilliant.
So Homer is bored at home. It's all crappy TV on. He's like, oh, what the fuck am I going to do? And then Marge gives him some flyers to hand out to the neighborhood for a local rummage sale. They're going to do a neighborhood rummage sale. As far as I know, this is one of the first times Homer actually walks around the neighborhood. I don't mean just to Ned's house. I mean walks around the neighborhood. Now, I'm not going to say that whose house because he walks to like a Pooh's house at one point. He walks to other people's homes. I'm not saying
the geography never really made sense.
And I don't think, and they even make fun of it in a second here. But I just thought that was a neat little thing. It's like you never really see them walk around their own neighborhood.
Yeah.
So Homer walks around the neighborhood to hand out flyers and talks to some of the local neighbors. And then this is where the joke comes. They make a joke of like, oh, I never noticed that house over there.
Yeah.
Right across from the house, Simpsons house is a
mansion.
giant mansion, a gated mansion. Yeah, it's like, how would you ever not notice it? It's like something that never existed before, all of a sudden exists in this one episode. Then the rummage sale takes place, and a few notable things. One of the when Marge and Homer are like looking for crap to put in the auction sale or in the rummage, like the garage sale, and Marge finds Homer's old jacket from when he was younger, and it says Disco Stew. And she's like, who's Disco Stew? And Homer's like, I was trying to write Disco Stud. I ran out of room. So it says Disco Stew. But then, coincidentally, we get introduced to, this is the first episode of him, Disco Stew.
That's the first episode.
That's the introduction of Disco Stew.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's the joke, is that how are you going to sell a jacket that says Disco Stew? Coincidentally, there's a Disco Stew. And by the way, he doesn't buy the jacket. Because he goes, Disco Stew doesn't need to advertise.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so he ends up buying it. There's some great little moments of the rummage sale, but the big reveal is at the end of the rummage sale, some big moving trucks suddenly pull up and pull into the gated estate, like the big mansion. Somebody new is moving into the neighborhood. Everybody swarms, all the residents swarm around, they're crowded. Everybody's expectant to see like who could be taking this big mansion home? Who could it be? It is revealed to be former President George Bush Sr. in one of my favorite cameo episodes of all time, even though it is not him. So in case you're wondering, like, did they get him? Of course they didn't.
Who did they actually get to voice?
I don't know. It's somebody doing an impersonation.
Probably just one of the Simpsons people.
Their impersonation, I'm not even saying it's accurate, but it's hilarious. Like the voice they got for George Bush in this is so perfect. Like, all of his lines are delivered so well. So now the neighborhood is all hyped because there's a former president living among them. Everybody immediately starts sucking up to the president.
Yeah.
And I like the way they set this up where the first people to greet the new president is Ned Flanders and his family.
Of course.
And immediately Ned and George Bush get along, and they're actually very similar, which is great foreshadowing. They're setting up that the Bushes are like the Flanders. They're very plain Jane, square, simple individuals. They'd both be
presumably like conservative Christian, like
right. They're making that comparison. They're showing you that they're like the Flanderses. They're not like the other family. We got a great shot of Bart as they're having their nice little meeting. Bart like slowly walks or rolls by on his skateboard and just like looks at them, and it's like a little great foreshadowing, ominous shot. While this is happening, Homer, of course, is not impressed. He's just like, whatever, I don't fucking care. Like, so what? It's a former president. Whoop-de-doo, right?
Yeah.
And there's a great shot of all the neighbors are like, everyone starts jogging with Bush. And like they all are like smiling, like in awe of him. And even Homer's like on a hammock, and even Santa's little helper perks up and then runs after George Bush as if even the dog wants to suck up to the president. And this is one of the funniest Homer internal monologue moments.
I guess you might say he's barking up the wrong bush. There it is, Homer. The cleverest thing you'll ever say, and nobody heard it. Don't!
And then Homer's immediately just like, don't. Great. I just find that so, because very rarely does Homer actually come up with clever things. Yeah. There it is,
and
Homer.
Of course it'd be when no one's around.
Right. The cleverest thing you'll ever say, and nobody heard it. So then what follows is the meat and potatoes. Like the meat of this episode is they are doing a parody of Dennis the Menace. And holy fuck does it work well with these with these characters.
Yeah.
So Bart is obviously Dennis the Menace, and George Bush is supposed to be Mr. Wilson, and Barbara Bush is Mrs. Wilson.
Yeah.
And this dynamic works so fucking well.
And again, it's like calling back to in the late 80s, early 90s when Bush was president, The Simpsons as well was more Bart-centric.
Right.
Like a lot of Bart was essentially the main character. It wasn't until they got a few seasons in that Homer started becoming more of the focus of the episodes. So it makes sense that Bart would be antagonizing him.
Well, and it's also it also speaks to like George Bush was a very like out of date president. He was very like not hip, not with the times. Him and Barbara Bush were extremely conservative. So Bart's supposed to be like the cool, hip, new generation, meeting the crusty, old, like grumpy generation. That works so fucking well. So that they then started a tense relationship with Bart basically annoying the former president and having several shenanigans ensue, which ultimately results in Bart accidentally destroying George Bush's memoir, his like typed up memoir.
Yep.
At which point, George Bush spanks Bart as punishment, which Marge and Homer are extremely against. And this sets into motion the second half of the episode, which is Homer and George Bush having a neighbor war.
Yeah.
This episode is just pure fun. I know it's not on yours.
I don't think this would ever crack my top 10. It's an interesting choice.
It's just every time I'm like, oh, Two Bad Neighbors. I just love
You're locked in.
Oh, it's okay. So things I like. I love Bart. The voice acting with Bart and all the scenes with Bart and where he's driving George Bush nuts are perfect. So like immediately after he meets him, George Bush is like a grumpy old man, just like doesn't want anything to do with this like annoying kid. And Barbara Bush is like the innocent, like, oh, George, come on, he's just a cute little boy, not knowing that like Bart is actually like, you know,
a terror,
a little terror. And there's like the great scene where like George is supposed to be, he's showing old photos to Bart, which is like, you know, that trope of like old people showing young people photos that they don't give a shit about,
albums,
that they're not going to give a shit about. And George is like taking it all serious. He's like, there's a picture of me with Charlton Heston. And Bart's just like not engaged at all. And he just he keeps going, who's that, George?
Who's that, George?
That's me with Charlton Heston. He was.
Who's that, George?
See, you wouldn't know him. That's Bob Mossbacher. He was secretary of.
That's a dumb name. Who's that, George?
Maybe he thinks Bart is a dumb.
How many times were you president, George?
Just once. Bar, isn't it time for dinner yet?
I'm making rice. It'll be a while.
Well, that's so-and-so. And as he's answering, who's that, George?
Yeah. Who's that, George?
Who's that, George?
Who's that, George?
That's a dumb name. Like he's being so annoying. I fucking love that. But Barbara Bush is like doing it's just like the setup of a Dennis the Menace episode. George Bush is like asleep. And Barbara Bush is like gardening in the front lawn, and then Bart shows up with like a slingshot in his back pocket, and then he's like, "Oh, is Mr. Bush around? He's awfully grumpy." And she's like, "Oh, that's just his way. He really likes you, Bart." Like she's
just clueless.
So then she sends him in to wake up George Bush, and he like blows like, I don't know, some like peace horn, some like antique horn.
Of course.
And he wakes him up, and Bart's like, "Those are some funny looking pajamas." And George Bush is like, "These are presidential pajamas. You have to be president you have to be president to get them, and you're not." And Bart immediately, "Yes, I am."
Where'd you get those pajamas?
They're presidential pajamas. You have to be president, and you're not president.
Yes, I am.
No, you're not. Bar.
No, you're not.
Yes, I am.
Like, this is such a good episode of Bart being a little shit.
Yeah.
And George Bush is the perfect foil to that. He is the perfect victim of that. It works so well of Bart just driving George Bush like up the wall. And I love all of his like little muttering things he will do. He's always like Bart's trying to find like candy in their kitchen. And then Barbara Bush is like, "I can bake you some cookies if you like." And then like again, Bart's being all sweet around Barbara Bush. And George like mutters under his breath. He's like, "Can't remember the last time she made me cookies."
Older people don't eat much candy, Bart, but I could bake you some cookies if you like.
Can't remember the last time she made cookies for me.
What's that?
No, nothing.
So fucking good. And then speaking of the spanking, because George Bush is like, he's old school, right? So like
that's an older generation.
Yeah, but when he spanks Bart, it's like once. He literally like he's like one spank, and then he's like, "Now think about what you did, young man." And it more just annoys Bart that like someone had the gall to do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But Homer takes it so personally and angry. He's like, "He spanked you?" Like he's just so angry. But Grandpa has a great little interjection. "Big deal. When I was a pup, we got spanked till the cows came home. Grover Cleveland spanked me on 2 non-consecutive occasions."
Grover Cleveland.
Grover Cleveland. and then Marge is like, "But we just don't believe in physical violence." And Grandpa's like, "And that's why your no good kids are running wild." And it like cuts to Lisa, and she's like quietly reading a book. That's such a great cut. No good kids are running wild.
Yeah.
Great.
That's gold.
Homer, this is why I love this episode so much.
Because then it becomes Homer versus Bush.
Yes. And one of the formulas on the show that works so well is when you take Homer and pit him up against something else, even if Homer's in the wrong, the needless rivalry episodes, and they kind of do it in the State of New York versus Homer Simpson. And another episode that almost made my list was Trash of the Titans, where Homer runs to be the city waste disposal, whatever it's called, manager.
Guess, yeah.
And he has a needless rivalry against it's something Peterson, who's like remember what I'm talking about? He's like,
I know.
And it's
that
Steve
episode.
Martin. Steve Martin's the voice of that Peterson guy.
Yeah.
And Homer just needlessly makes him his rival, where he's like, are we going to listen to old man Peterson here? He's like, old man? I'm only 3 years older than you. And like, I love the idea. Like, I think it works so well when you give Homer just this hill to die on. And it's just
the
a
Dean.
dumb thing. The Dean, again.
Yeah.
I works so well. And him and Bush work so well. It starts off where immediately the whole thing is Homer wants an apology from George Bush.
Yeah.
And George Bush is like, no, your kid's and again, to the credit of the show, George Bush is actually right. Bart is a little
Bart
shit.
is a monster.
Yeah, Bart is a little shit. And Bart 100% should be reprimanded. So again, to the credit of the show, they don't actually portray George Bush in a terrible light. He's just like a normal average guy. He might be a little square and conservative, but like he's not wrong in that like Bart really was being a menace. Like he was being a little shit. He did destroy important property. There needs to be some consequence. He might have been in the wrong in that you don't lay hands on another person's child.
On someone's child.
But Homer is obviously just like, no, he's not listening to reason. And he starts a feud with George Bush. And I love the scene where they're just like, they go like face to face and they're like threatening each other, but nothing comes of it.
All right, mister. You want trouble, you're gonna get trouble.
Oh, I want trouble, all right.
Then you're gonna get trouble.
No, you're gonna get trouble.
Oh, that's good. That's good, because I want trouble.
Then we're agreed there'll be trouble.
Oh, yeah. Lots of trouble.
Trouble it is.
For you.
Don't!
And what precedes is a bunch of like pranks. They almost have like a prank war on each other.
Well, it's almost like Grumpy Old Men or something like that playing
Yeah,
pranks on each
it's
other.
very similar to Grumpy Old Men. And I find it funny that like, so Bart and Homer come up with some great pranks. So there's the bottle rocket prank where like they get 1 million bottle rockets and they start shooting them over at George Bush's house while he's like doing toe touches in the window. And like every time George Bush tries to get involved, it's like the lamest thing he can come up with. And he draws like the mural, and it's like a horrible drawing, a horrible painting of, it's like spray painted. It says like bad neighbors.
Yeah.
And it's like a horrible picture of Bart and Homer. And like all the other neighbors are confused. They're like, I don't understand. It's like Dr. Hibbers like, I don't understand. Are you saying that you and Barbara are bad neighbors? And then he's like, no, it's the boy and the father. He's like, I know the boy's name is Bart. I don't know the father's name. What's the father's name? And Barbara in the background. I'm not getting involved, George.
He doesn't know Homer's name? The boy and the father.
Yeah.
What?
So good. There's the infamous rainbow wig prank. They put super glue on Bush's head and then put a rainbow colored wig on
Jesus
him.
Christ. Yeah.
Yeah. And then he ends up having to go to like a press conference with like rainbow colored hair. Finally, George Bush has had enough. This is one of my favorite shots is the biggest thing George Bush does to get back at them is he drives his car on their lawn and just like starts tearing it up.
Yeah.
It's so fucking good. And I love Marge, naive Marge is like, I think Mr. Bush is lost.
So she can't be critical of like the president.
And then and Homer just like glaring out the window. He's not lost. So good.
He's not lost.
And then this leads into the final climax, which is, for whatever reason, only in this one episode, there's a tunnel system. There's a sewer system that leads underneath the street into like, so it's like underneath the street near Homer's property, Bart and Homer are able to get into the sewer system to then go towards the Bush property.
Yeah.
George Bush sees Bart and Homer walking in the sewer, and then he jumps down. Before that happens, though, the final prank, which doesn't end up really happening, is Homer's going to use locusts. I guess we never really know what it was there, but he has a box of. They're just like casually walking with a box of locusts, and Homer has
to release them inside their house.
Who knows?
Guess?
But I love Homer's line. So I thought, what would God do in this situation?
So I thought to myself, what would God do in this situation?
Locusts. They'll drive him nuts.
It's all in the Bible, son. It's the prankster's Bible.
It's all in the Bible, son. It's the prankster's Bible.
Just releasing a horde of locusts.
Locusts? Like, that's what it turned into?
And then we end up getting another president at the end of this episode.
Oh, wait, before we get to that,
Okay.
one of the funniest moments in the whole episode, Homer versus George Bush. They actually fight.
Yeah, that's right.
And it is a fun fucking fight because George Bush was I believe he was ex-CIA. Like, he's actually ex-military.
Well, yeah, I mean, he went to West Point and stuff like that.
Yeah, he's
in the 40s or
right.
something.
But I love the fact, again, they don't
Yeah.
really shit on George Bush, but I like the fact that George Bush actually is like, Homer's huge.
He's a military officer.
George Bush
Yeah.
is an old man. He's like doing pretty fucking well against Homer. He's actually kicking Homer's ass.
And this is the kind of thing where it's like, how did they get away with this on
I know.
TV?
It's fucking
For the
amazing.
mid-90s?
And so
Like,
they have this big fucking
how
epic
did
fight.
the network, how did like Fox sign off on being like, yeah, this is cool. Just have like
go for it.
them fight the former
Especially because
president.
Fox is so Republican.
Yeah.
Like, and they're kind of taking the piss out of a former Republican president.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then the phenomenal ending where eventually George Bush, through a series of events, George Bush has to apologize to Homer, and George decides to leave. Fuck this neighborhood, we're getting out of here. Immediately after he leaves, a new president comes into the neighborhood. Former President Gerald Ford.
Gerald Ford.
Which, do you know anything about Gerald Ford?
I think he was like an interim president in between when Nixon
Yes.
had to step down.
He's not. He was never like a beloved president. He was basically like exactly what you said. He's an interim president.
Because there was the Watergate scandal.
Right.
Then Nixon went down, and I believe then it was Gerald Ford.
I don't know when he went in, but he wasn't. I don't believe he was elected. I think it was like he was a default president that went slotted in. But
we're not American folks.
Yes,
so.
we are Canadian. But I actually did read up a little bit about Gerald Ford, and they portray him as extremely slow and kind of dumb like Homer. So Gerald Ford actually was a bit of a slower person because he he was high-level football player in college. And because of that, it's speculated he had like CTE, like he had brain trauma. So he actually was more of just like a friendly, like simple man, like I don't want to say simpleton, but like a very everyman type of person. Somebody that maybe shouldn't have been at that high level of office. But I like the fact that him and Homer immediately get along. They picked a simple president to get along with a simple man. And it's a great ending that they immediately, unlike George, it's like,
well, he's more like, I guess, I don't know about much about him. But
I think the implication, the joke they're making is Homer is just a dumb boob everyman. George Bush is a little bit more of a intellectual, like, I don't want to say milquetoast, but he's a very straight-laced, very, staunch.
Yeah.
Regardless of a career politician.
Yeah.
Gerald Ford is just a kind of like a bumbling everyman he's kind of like a Rob Ford.
Regardless of political polarity, he was more of just like an everyman type
and
guy.
That's why immediately him and Homer get along.
Yeah.
I love this episode. It's so fucking fun.
That's a surprise pick.
I know.
I do like that episode.
It's one I didn't think you'd have.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people do, but I love it.
Yeah.
And kudos to the George Bush voice actor because all of his lines are so good. It's just so good.
That's one, like, it's amazing they got away with it too, which kudos to them.